Alright guys, welcome back to the Project Kitfox channel. Got a kind of a different video today. We're going to tear this engine apart. This is the original engine that was on the project from the first flight up to about 60 hours when it developed a head gasket leak. So I'll show some clips here from this video. Alright, for starters, I can get a little closer look here at what I was talking about. You can see this residue here, and you can kind of see right between the two cylinders, right in there is where the coolant came out. And you can see it came down and burned all over the exhaust, and some of it a little bit on the firewall. So what I need to do here is go ahead and take the exhaust off, undo all the electrical and fuel. I also have to undo the oil system. Prop needs to come off. Airbox and throttle bodies are coming off. I'm just going to use this throttle body and put it back on the other engine. Once that's all disconnected, then I can loosen the engine mounts, lift the engine out, and put the other one on. Now, a couple things I have to wait for is the parts internally for the gearbox. There's a seal in here and a gasket that I'll need for the new engine. So those are on order from Teal Jenkins. So I'll need to drain the fluid out of here, which is a bummer because I just changed the fluid in that. Drain the oil, drain the coolant. So all the liquids come out of the engine, which is always fun. So I was just cleaning out the coolant, and this is what the coolant turned into when I added that stuff. It's almost like a jello. See this paste down here? You can't imagine your coolant flowing very well if it turns into that. And that, I'm pretty sure, is what caused that head gasket to go, and the water pump seal. So moral of the story is don't put that additive crap in your engine. Alright guys, so I got all the fluids drained out, exhaust is off, all the electrical is disconnected, fuel's disconnected, throttle bodies are off, pretty much the engine is disconnected from all the systems. Next is the gearbox, and then the engine mounts, and pull the engine. Probably what I'll do before I take it off the mount is go ahead and start working on the gearbox. I do have the puller to get the gearbox off, so I'll get that going. And then I'd like to swap the valve cover and all the sensors. I really just have knock sensor, oil pressure. I think that's it. Everything else is up on the throttle body. So it's coming along. I'm at it, a couple hours is all to get to this point. It's easy to tear it down. Hopefully it's as easy to put it back together. I don't know what to think about that. See, it took 3 hours. That's not bad. Alright guys, for starters, I do have the shop manual, and it has pretty good instructions on how to properly take the engine apart and put it back together. So this is a great resource if you're able to find one. You can see on the cover, this is what it covers as far as the different years, models of the snowmobile. And this is the whole snowmobile, so it has a track, clutch, everything as far as the cooling system on the sled. But it does have a very detailed section on basically doing a tear down and rebuild of the engine. So I'll be using that book as a guidance, so I'm not just going after this, taking stuff apart. So after reading through it, basically we're going to remove the valve cover. We're going to take the cams out. You got to take the cam gears off to get it out from the chain. Then we're going to undo the head bolts, and once those are removed, we should be able to take the head off and take a look and see what's going on with this gasket in there. And if it looks real bad, I may then flip the whole thing over and open up the bottom end. If it doesn't look that bad, because there was no coolant in the oil, I'm not that concerned about the bottom end. It's more the top end and what's going on with the head. So, well, let's get to it. See the leaky head gasket over here. It's just been sitting in my hanger, and I was going to send it off to have it overhauled by Casey Hawk And we were talking, and he had an engine come in that used that same stuff, that Blue Devil coolant leak stop, and he said it pretty much ruined the engine because it clogged up all of the coolant passageways. So I thought I'd maybe tear this one down and take a look at it and see if it's worth sending him. You can already see the green residue just at the top of the engine where the coolant comes out. There's like it just dried up in there, and it's like a caked on. So I'm worried that that's going to be the case throughout the whole engine. So I just thought that I should grab the camera out. I did start taking the valve. I took the valve cover off, and then the camshafts, I'm just loosening those up. These are the covers for the cam. I'll get this last one off and then take the whole cam assembly out, then get into the head. Well, I ran into my first interesting issue on the number 2 cylinder. The spark plug won't come out. It is do about a quarter turn and it binds up in both directions. I don't want to force it, so I might leave that in there and remove the head, see what it looks like on the other side. But there's something going on there in that number 2 cylinder, it looks like. That is also between the 2 and 3 is where the leak is. So I wonder if we don't have some damage in that cylinder. So first issue. The head's loose now. Let's see if I can get it to come off, and see what I'm going to do about this chain here in a second. Oh, yeah, I'd say there's an issue with this engine. Okay. All right. Show you what I see. Look at the number 2 piston. That is shot. Matter of fact, I don't even know if I can get it to spin anymore. No, it's moving. So that piston is moving, but you can see it's totally wasted. I did not expect to see that. So the head gasket issue definitely leaked into that piston. I have to put some covers back on to hold the valve shims in place before I can flip the head over and take a look at it. But that is why that spark plug would not come out. Well guys, I want to do a follow up here. So I just pulled the head off the engine. You've seen the time lapse. Very definitive that there's an issue. I mean, that number 2 cylinder had definitely got water and coolant, or water coolant mixed into the cylinder, and it has rusted. It is free moving still. Like I can rotate the piston a little bit. I mean, it moves up and down, but that cylinder, you know, that piston shot. The cylinder is going to probably need to have some work done. But worse is the head. That particular cylinder. Look at the valves on that head, and I can't get the spark plug out. So that was another interesting thing that happened. As I started to take the spark plug out, it wouldn't come all the way out, and now I can't get it back in. It's just kind of stuck midway in and out. So I don't know if this thing is repairable. So here's the water pump. You can see the gelatin coolant inside. Obviously it ruined the water pump as well. So I used a soft wire brush and cleaned up the head and the pistons, and actually it turned out looking like there wasn't any residual corrosion done. There's a little bit of pitting on top of the number 2 piston, but after working on it a little bit and cleaning it up, I think this engine is salvageable. So I'm going to reassemble it and go ahead and send it off to Casey and see what he thinks. Alright guys, so that was basically the assembly or disassembly and assembly of the Apex engine. A couple things that we learned from this disassembly was that the head gasket had failed on this engine. What I want to do is see if it was salvageable as far as should I send this engine in to Casey Hawk to have it rebuilt. I also really wanted to educate myself on the teardown, disassembling the engine, and putting it back together. So one, I know what he's talking about when he tells me specific information, and two, just for my own education, knowing how this engine works, if something happens with it, knowing whether or not I can change out a head gasket, do the pistons, whatever. I did consider doing the rebuild myself as far as new pistons and everything in this. The problem was when it came to the very specific tools you need, the price of the tools would be more than having Casey do the engine. In the long run, I'd probably rather have the tools, but I'd also, on an aircraft engine, if this is going to go back in the sled, I wouldn't mind building it and putting it in there. If it failed, it's not a big deal. On an airplane, it is a big deal, so I want somebody who's done it hundreds of times to do this one. So I did put it back together. The main thing I wanted to see if I could figure out how to do was get the timing chain and the timing and the valves all back together in the right position. And I was able to do that, so that's pretty cool. The number 2 cylinder did have some damage to the piston. I cleaned it up really well. I'm sure you could run this thing in a sled with a new head gasket and it would be fine. The head didn't show any warpage from the measuring I did. I'll have Casey do it as well. Had I put a new head gasket in, this would be good to go, I think, to put back into a snowmobile and run it. It would probably do just fine in an airplane for a long time. But I didn't want to seat a new head gasket just to have Casey tear it apart again, so I put the old one back in, put everything back together, basically the way it was, except for I had cleaned up the corrosion that was in that number 2 cylinder. So now I'm going to crate it up with another engine. We're going to send them off to Casey, and this one's going to be rebuilt. I do have a couple other engines, so this one I'm going to do probably some real custom work on, and I'll probably be more on that later on when I decide exactly what we're doing. This one, because it could use a new piston in the number 2 cylinder, I decided to go ahead and make this one kind of the race motor, or the experimental project motor. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in lower compression pistons and set it up for it to be a boosted motor. Now, to get more horsepower out of an Apex, these are fuel injected, normally aspirated, whereas the Sidewinder engine, the 3-cylinder newer sled version, is a factory turbo. So it's all set up with lower compression already. You can change the size of the turbo if you wanted to, but the factory turbo, factory setup, Sidewinder engine's already got that boost potential. The Apex doesn't. It's not set up for boosted, to run boosted. So in order to do that safely, you're going to want to lower the compression. There's a couple ways to do that. You can stack 2 head gaskets, kind of the cheap way to do it. Use the factory internal stack head gasket to get your compression lowered by raising the head up a little bit. There's some negatives to that. I mean, you're raising everything up, except you're not extending the bolt length, and you've got the potential to squash down that. It's like I said, it's the quick and cheap way to do it. If you're putting it in a sled and you don't care if it makes it more in a season, it's probably just fine. Again, in an airplane, we want to go the best route possible, so what we're going to do is we're going to change out the pistons to lower the compression to, you can either go 9-to-1 or 10-to-1. I've kind of done some studying on that and found that the majority of the advice on that is to go to 10-to-1. So then it leaves what you want to do to boost this. I mean, you could run it, you could do nitrous oxide to get more performance out of it. You'd probably set up the ring gap a little bit different if you're going to do that. And that's a potential, that's a possibility. But in reality, those systems are really not very accurate, because there's a lot of stuff that has to go on. One, you're always filling a bottle. You have to keep it heated in order to get a consistent pressure out of the bottle, so you need a bottle heater, you need somewhere to mount that, the whole system in. I did play around with a nitrous system, and just wasn't happy with how it worked. Pressure kept dropping off, and so I would have had to invest quite a bit more into making the system work better. It's totally something I could do, and it would make as much as you want as far as boost, but I think eventually you're going to end up damaging the engine by running nitrous on it. So I think a more effective way to get power out of this is to create boost either through a turbo or a supercharger. Now the sled world has a version of both of those for this motor. The supercharger that goes on the Apex gets about 12 pounds of boost, which would give you, basically a good way to calculate is 10 horsepower per pound of boost, but with a supercharger it's robbing some of that power back. So out of 12 psi you might get like 80-90 horsepower boost, which would be pretty substantial. You'd be able to go up to about 240 on this. That would be some really good power, and it would put a lot of distance between a good portion of the stall drag field. So that's an option. The other option is to go with a turbo, and then the turbo really comes down to how much you want to boost it. You can go all the way up to 22, and so you could really push this thing upwards of 400 horsepower. So you got to kind of balance that out with what's your limiting factor. Well, factory fuel nozzles are going to be limiting, because as you increase the boost, you're going to have to increase the fuel. And for you guys that don't know a whole lot about engines, those that do, you're following along with what I'm talking about. But there's a bunch of resources on YouTube. If you guys like to watch YouTube videos, look up how a turbo works or how a supercharger works. There's tons of really good videos. I can put some in the description, ones that I've watched and learned quite a bit. It's just basically a vacuum, man. You're sucking in air and you're adding fuel and you're creating an explosion. So if you add more air, you need more fuel. So in order to get more fuel out of the injectors, you need to have bigger injectors. You need to have more fuel pressure. So as you scale one up, you have to scale everything up. You can't just add boost and not do something about the internals, because it will break. So you got to change the internals. You have to add the boost. You have to do something about the fuel system. You also have to keep in mind the cooling system, because if you're adding more power, more explosion or more burn inside, you're going to create more heat. So you have to have some way to deal with the heat. So that's why originally I went with a normally aspirated engine. It's designed that way, and there wasn't anything you had to change, or you didn't have to change everything. So at 160 horsepower, this engine is amazing for everyday use in a Kitfox, Highlander, Super Stol, whatever you put it in. It's going to do great. The only place I'm really wanting more power is for competition stuff, and I've gone back and forth of whether it's even worth the hassle to try to do, get higher up in the field with with the airplane I've got and what I have to work with. But really what it comes down to is it's in the spirit of the entire Project Kitfox project, and that is to learn more, and by doing an engine that's turboed, I'm already learning a ton more about superchargers, turbos, nitrous, like all the stuff I've studied up on to try to make the best decision on what I want to do for a race motor. It's in the spirit of what I like to do. Learn about something, put your hands on, build something, and see if it works. So I'm just gonna keep kind of on the side when I have time work on this project. I created this this engine stand, firewall forward basically, so I can design everything on here, and then it should just bolt right on the airplane. Hope you guys enjoyed that, seeing what it's like inside the Apex head and into the cylinders. Should have some more content coming up here in the near future, and so stay tuned for that. You guys go over and check me out on Instagram, Project Kitfox, and if you want to hit me up, you can always reach me at Bowen@Aero@yahoo.com. We'll catch you on the next one.